had an emergency landing and it didn't even make the news. That's right. My flight had an emergency landing. I thought I was about to die, and it did not even make the news. Now, I'm an Air Force veteran, and I'm going to tell you some things that you should know in terms of the safest places to sit on an aircraft. But before we get into that, I wanted to help some of you guys because I know a lot of you are probably very nervous about flying right now with all the stuff that you're hearing in the news. You're hearing about stuff with the FAA and the people are understaffed, and then there was the DC crash, and then there was a Philly crash, and then there was another flight where the wing caught on fire, and it's just like planes are falling out of the skies. Now, the thing I want you guys to understand is that the media is exploiting your fear right now, and they are presenting a false reality in terms of the safety of flying. Flying still is one of the safest ways to travel. Absolutely. And I'm going to illustrate or sort of illuminate a little bit of the deception by sharing my experience. And I did a video about this on my channel when it happened. I was flying out of Miami. I think it was JetBlue. And we took off. Everything seemed to be fine. And it was nighttime, by the way. And then all of a sudden, I heard like this boom sound. It wasn't too loud, but it was definitely loud enough that you're like, what the hell is that? And then I just see this spark going by the window. And it's just like, I'm like, oh, holy shit. I think we saw a couple of them. It was more than just one. And, I unfortunately can imagine what it feels like or what it felt like for people that were involved in some of these crashes. Because obviously I had no way of knowing what was about to happen. And in that moment, I thought that was it. I thought I was gonna die, man. So yeah, everybody started freaking out. One of the big things was there was no announcement. I look at the DC crash. I think they were in the air for 30 seconds after the impact. I can't imagine being in a plane and then 30 seconds later you're in the river. But I think just like them, I don't think they got an announcement. There would have not been time for an announcement based on the data that I'm seeing so far. I believe it's likely that at some point in time, the pilots were aware that there was an issue. Understatement for sure. But due to the rules of flight, your primary responsibility is to fly the aircraft. So it is unlikely that they would have had time to make an announcement. The instant that they recognized that there was something, well, seeing this potential impact, seeing the helicopter approaching, the second that the pilots recognized that, they would have instantly went into avoidance mode. It's how do I avoid hitting this aircraft, whether it's change in direction, altitude, whatever it is. So that would have been the priority. Communication is not the priority. So that would mean they probably were, happy to be almost landing and, all of a sudden they see the plane suddenly do a jerk, that's the pilot trying to do something, and they freak out and then bang. So obviously my situation wasn't that dramatic by any stretch of the imagination, but in the moment, it certainly feels terrifying for sure. But all the passengers started freaking out, and One thing that was interesting to see the dynamics of human nature is that we actually had some passengers that were. It's interesting because it's just like what we see with politics. The people who downplay, right? People talk about the threats of Donald Trump, and people they try to downplay it and like, oh, you're exaggerating. Oh, he won't do that. Blah blah blah. So just like how with politics you have people with different perspectives on an aircraft going through an incident, you have people with different perspectives, and you have those down players. Those it's fine, and that was interesting dynamic to see that happening in real time because there were those of us that were like, this is serious. And one of the priorities was we wanted to make sure that the pilot was aware, right? Because we didn't hear any announcement. And I guess, like I said before, the priority is to fly the aircraft. So, I mean, I would assume the pilot heard the noise and was aware that something was going on. I don't know that he would have seen anything because, I mean, it's a spark coming from the engine. So that's going to go backwards. The pilot's looking forward. But maybe a gauge. He might or might not have had a warning. The pilot might not have had any warning at all. No gauges saying anything. It's possible. The main thing would have been the noise. Did he hear the noise or not? And if you heard the noise, what did it sound like from the cockpit? I don't know. All right. But we were concerned that the pilot knew what was going on. And we weren't getting any announcement. No one was saying anything. And some passengers were just kind of like, you know, I think their attitude was kind of like, don't panic or whatever, just relax or whatever. But myself and others, our perspective was it is critical that we ensure that they're aware of what's happening. But I think one of the flight attendants came up at some point, and then they weren't really saying anything, man. We were just kind of in the dark. We're all like freaking out. You could see people just like going crazy. And they ended up, I guess, requesting an emergency landing, and the plane, went around, and we landed, and there was all the fire trucks and everything there. And then we got off immediately. And what was it? We got to the gate, and then there was like instructions about where to go. I think they were getting all the luggage off and everything. So they told us that they're gonna try to get us on a new flight, whatever. So we all went to pick up our luggage, and they said they were gonna give us they were gonna comp us like a hotel or something like that. That was a disaster. They sent buses to the hotel, I mean to the airport, and when we got to the hotel, I mean the line was like all the way around the lobby. It was absolutely insane. But one thing that I did is I kept looking to see if it was on the news, and it was never on the news, right? So I share this story to give you a little bit of a perspective. Although flying is one of the safest ways to travel, crashes happen, and most of them don't get reported, just like mine, right? The reason you need to understand that is because whenever there's a big crash, because that's what the media is basically entertainment in this country, right? You want something that's going to draw a lot of views. And what draws a lot of views is, unfortunately, big fatalities, 300 people dead, something like that. Or if the plane crashes into a, like Empire State Building or something like that, that'll draw views. But like my flight where no one died, it's just not something that's going to draw a lot of attention. And even in crashes, right? You'll have a small plane crash. Like, for example, the Philly crash, I don't think that would have been national news if not for the DC crash. And that's what I'm getting to. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. The Philly crash is a crash that would have happened normally, and you wouldn't know about it unless you got it from local news. If you lived in Philly, you would absolutely hear about that because to Philly, that's a big story. But to New York or California, I mean, I'm sorry to be callous, but it's kind of just from a entertainment. That's what news really is in this country. From an entertainment standpoint, who cares in California that some random medical flight crashed? I mean, there's people dying all the time for many reasons. There's car crashes with much higher body counts happening all the time, so it's just not a hot story. But in close proximity to the DC crash, it becomes a big story. So that's why they report it. So the point is, just understand that you're gonna get reports on every single crash, right? You're now going to get over reporting on plane crashes because it's a hot topic right now. The reason why you need to understand that is because this is gonna like they're playing with your emotions. They know that you guys are kind of freaking out, and they are taking advantage of that for profit. So they're gonna give you stories that they know are gonna freak you out even more, and by you being freaked out even more, that's gonna get you to watch, which gets them their money. So your perception of how safe flying is going to be distorted significantly by a psychological effect that the media is aware of, which is, again, if you see a big crash, then any other crash, you go like, oh my goodness, another crash, and another one, oh, plane just falling out of the sky. Of course, the interesting thing to consider is, so how do you know when it's actually a big deal, right? Because that could happen, right? I mean, we could have a major failure with the FAA for some reason, and the crash rate could actually be much higher than normal, and it could get to the point where it's something worthy of concern. I think, I mean, if you want to dive that deep into it, then do the research. This is the information age. You can look and see, total crashes last year. I'm sure there's some report somewhere, total crashes last year versus the year before, to find out a baseline of what's normal for crashes. And then you can pay attention. And if the numbers exceed what's normal, then there you go. If they don't, then you know that this is just normal and the news is just over reporting on it. What's interesting is I keep hearing people saying that this is the first crash in the US in 15 years. I don't know what they mean by that because there were other crashes in the US. I don't remember one right now, but I think Hawaii comes to mind. I think there's some plane, they did an emergency landing in the water or something like that. There's certainly been more crashes in the United States in the last 15 years, but major media are repeating that line. This is yet another example where I see our media just failing, where, you know, someone of authority says something and then everybody else just repeats it, and no one's really verifying this information, right? Because I mean, I think CNN repeated it, and it's just like, does anyone check what they're saying? But regardless, so I'm going to end with the thing that I said I was going to give you guys before, which is the recommendations in terms of where you sit in the aircraft. Now, obviously, I can't give you the best advice for every single scenario, but I can give you some thing to work with, which is sitting in the back of an aircraft is problematic in terms of smoke, in terms of the way the ventilation systems work, and in terms of in a rescue situation, getting people out of the back of the aircraft could be problematic. So you might want to avoid sitting in the back of an aircraft. Also, I remember in the Air Force in school, they taught us about, well, I would say taught, this was just something in class, the instructors might mention certain details, which is kind of not part of the lesson, but it's kind of related to it. And I remember we were talking about engines, jet engines, and they talked about potential engine failures, and the parts of the engine, the speed at which they spin. Good to see you, Environmental Coffee House. Bottom line is, you don't want to sit within the I forgot the term. Is it area of rotation or something? Axis of rotation, whatever it is. For, forget about whatever the actual term is. It's just you don't want to be sitting near an engine. Pretty much, you have those spinning parts, right? And during certain incidents where there's a failure, some of those spinning parts can actually separate and enter the fuselage and obviously strike you. So in a scenario where you're in a multi-engine aircraft, maybe a catastrophic engine failure in one of the engines, it's got enough to land safely. However, so most people survive. However, maybe you don't because you're sitting next to the engine and you get penetrated by something in the engine. So you don't want to sit next to the engine. The other thing is, and engines are normally near the wings, and that's another problem area. Those wings generally carry massive fuel tanks. Jet fuel is very, very flammable. I don't know what they use in commercial aviation, but in the military we use JP8, I think, is what we were using. And I remember in one of the safety discussions that we got in class, they were talking about, I think they showed us a video, and it was like a drop of JP8 fuel, and they ignited it, and it's like, bah! I'm just like, holy shit, that's a drop of jet fuel. So you can imagine, I mean, the amount of fuel that's in those wings. So in the event of some kind of a fire, right? Obviously, being right next to the fuel tanks probably where you don't want to be. And keep in mind, don't think negatively and just think about these fatal crashes where everyone dies. There are many flights that they are able to land, even with some level of casualties. People actually survive. So just because you have an engine failure or something goes bad, that doesn't mean you're dead, right? There are planes that you know people are able to survive these situations. So what we're talking about is just increasing the odds of survival. So avoid the wings, avoid the engines, and avoid the back of the aircraft. I'm not really going to comment on front, back, center in terms of, you guys can look that up. In terms of with impact, what part of the aircraft normally hits the ground. That's something you can look into. I just wanted to comment about the back, the fuel, and the engines. I guess also you'd want to consider where you are in relation to the exits from a perspective of obviously being able to get out of the aircraft, but also from a perspective of the mad stampede of people trying to get out because of the situation of potentially being trampled, right? And we also see another reason why they talk about putting your seat upright and all that good stuff, because in a panic situation where the aircraft is filling with smoke, right, and you can't see, and you're panicking, and you're trying to get out of your seat, and you got a window seat, and someone's seat is back and it's obstructing your path and you're not thinking straight because you're panicking, and you bump into the seat and you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And you're stumbling around. Maybe there's something on the floor and you trip and you fall, and then God forbid you fall into the aisle and you get trampled, and then that's it for you. So people get annoyed by some of these regulations, but that's the reason. That's one of the reasons for it, right? You want to make sure that in an event of an accident, you have a clear access to get out and click. You're not going to trample on something. You're not going to. So take these things seriously. I'm gonna leave for another video to talk about the whole turn off your cell phones thing. There is some level of logic to turning off your cell phone in terms of interference, but it's a bigger story than that. All right, I'm gonna end this live stream. Let me just take a look at the comments real quick. I just last third of the plane. That's where my nephew, who was a pilot, said it was a good spot. I hate when they put me by the wings, but I don't like to fly that much. Yeah, it's actually when I consider, I can't tell you this. This stuff is so old for me now, but I couldn't tell you like how fast those engines are spinning. But I think you can imagine when you look at the speed of those components. I mean, you got what the compressor blades, and man, I don't remember anything. I'm so, I'm so dumb. I don't remember anything anymore. But the bottom line is, when you think about the speed and the momentum and the energy, man, whoo! I don't want to be next to that. Fetal position. If you can't get out, no panic. I learned how not to panic. I almost drowned in an ocean. Wow, that's crazy. She who walks in the world word. So it was just that I think there was something wrong with the engine. So we felt obviously super dramatic because we thought we are gonna die. But the reality is, it ended up being not that big of a deal. And I'm saying that, but I don't know what would happen if we were higher up, if we were further away, right? I mean, we were close to the airport. We had just taken off, so we were able to, get back on the ground pretty quickly, depending on what it is. And they said it was something like it wasn't a big deal, like oh something something. So I don't trust that, man. I don't know. I'm not gonna trust what they say. So for all we know, it could have actually been pretty serious, like something that led to an engine fire or something like that. So maybe the fact that we were able to get on the ground that quickly, maybe that helped us. Also, the fact that we're just taking off, because what if it was in the middle of flight? People are tired, people are sleeping, they have the blinds down so nobody sees anything. They hear a sound, but it's just kind of like, oh, turbulence or whatever. So maybe things worked out the way that, the best possible way. And who knows, that could have been my final destination if this had happened at 20,000 or 30,000 feet, far away from the airport. So the bottom line, it was just a spark, some kind of spark coming from the engine. So we saw the spark go by and a boom sound. And then they just did an emergency landing. They had the fire trucks there. And, luckily, I'm here to tell the story. But I'll tell you, man, in that moment, I thought that was it. I thought that was it. I thought we were done. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is it. Um, Stay off plane if possible. World Econ for Clear Skies initiative is one of the go. I don't know about that. People need to pay attention. Glad you're okay. All right, guys. So anyway, the point of this video again was just to give you guys a little perspective. Don't panic. Don't freak out. Um, you're going to see a lot of more reporting on plane crashes than normal. That is going to happen. That is a strategy the media uses. They've been using it for a very long time. So you should expect to hear about more crashes, right? Whether there are more crashes than normal or not, that's a different topic, right? Whether the amount of crashes is unusual, that is a separate topic. But that there will be more crash stories, you should expect that. Nothing to do with FAA, nothing to do with Trump or whatever. If Kamala Harris was president right now, you should expect to see more crash stories. Doesn't matter who's in office or FAA is fully staffed or not. That should be your expectation, right? So seeing more crash stories alone should not be something where you're like, oh my goodness, because you should expect that that is normal. It's normal to have over reporting on crashes after a major crash. That crash in Philly, I mean, yeah, there was ring camera videos or whatever, but I mean, it was just. I'm not trying to diminish the lives lost. This is not about feelings or whatever. I'm just speaking from a business perspective, the media business. 3 people dying in a crash, and I don't think anyone was famous or whatever. It's just not a juicy story. I mean, I hate to say it. Like, don't get mad at me. It's not my business model, right? I'm not CNN. I'm not MSNBC. I'm just telling you this is how they operate, right? They want to see big. I shouldn't say they want to, right? But their business. Let's put it that way. I put it on their business model. Their business model wants to see more tragedy because that will draw traffic, and that's where the revenue comes from, right? So the Philly crash would not have been a national story if not for the DC crash. Understand that. So before you start freaking out about flying, just understand the game that's being played. And like I said before, if you want to really put your emotions aside and understand whether they're actual real threats or not. First of all, what's happening with the FAA right now, and it's been happening for a little bit, is definitely problematic for sure. So that's not something to dismiss. However, the amount of crashes, if you want to know whether that means anything or not, you have to look at what the previous records have been. And you got to look at it yourself because, again, mainstream media has been saying, this is the first crash in 15. That's not true, as far as I've seen, right? So you can't rely on them to tell you what's going on. I'm looking at this. It's funny, a whole bunch of birds. It's like 50 of them, and they're like spinning and they're flying in like a formation in circles right over the river. It's so crazy looking at that. It's like a swarm. Anyway, are they birds? Maybe they're not birds. Anyway, so yeah, you want to look at the data, right? Don't let the media tell you what's going on or how to think. Look at the actual data. Look at the annual, how many crashes per year, right? And then look at what's happening now, and then determine from that whether this is something crazy or it's just normal, right? All right, guys, I'm gonna sign out. Actually, out of curiosity, I'm gonna do some checking myself. I'm curious to know what the crashes have been. Maybe I'll do a video about it. Let me know. Comment if you want me to do a video about that.